It started when I was 8 years old. At the time, I had begun to have these jolts for my sleep. Some point near midnight, I would suddenly be thrown awake. It was like those moments in which you would just be about to sleep, but your body suddenly acts like you are falling. Only these jolts would cause me to feel like I was being thrown into the air. My parents at first chalked it up to insomnia. School at the time was stressful for me, with all sorts of new classes and information being taught, so I don't blame them for thinking that at first. However, the jolts were very rare at first, but over time, began to happen every night, and slowly. I would wake up with more panic, screaming and throwing punches at a threat which wasn't present. 5 days after these more aggravated jolts began, my parents began to think that insomnia was less likely. They began to ask if I had problems at school, things like bullies or mean teachers. I hadn't really had any bullies at the time, and all the teachers were nice, so the answer was always no. They took me to a few checkups with a local child's clinic. They found nothing physically wrong, but they noted that I had much more self-inflicted trauma, whatever the hell that was supposed to mean. They gave my parents a prescription for sleeping pills and suggested that I take one an hour before bed, hopefully to keep me asleep. These pills never worked at all. While I did feel more drowsy before bed, it never stopped the jolts from happening, and they continued to happen every time, at midnight. This went on for a while, and I just wanted the horror to end. I eventually asked my parents if there was a sleep doctor. They told me that while there was no such thing as a sleep doctor, they could have me visit a psychiatrist. Soon enough, I was sitting in an office with several toys, fidgets and books scattered about, as Dr. Cole, my psychiatrist at the time, proceeded to ask me several questions. They were ridiculously simple, with questions such as, "How old are you? Have you always felt like seeking psychiatric help? Do you sleep well? Do you eat healthy?" And so on. Then, after those questions, he took out several papers, the ones with splotches on them, to see how the patient's mind works on identifying it. I swear to God, every single one of those papers had 2 large, pitch-black circles on either side, so dark it felt like I could stick my hand in and lose it forever. I know that some of them may have had features similar to that, but for me, each one had the exact same spots, empty voids that seemed to stare directly into me. On about the 9th paper, I burst into tears and tried to cower under the desk, as Dr. Cole restacked the papers, slid them into a folder, and began to fill out a report. Later that day, my parents were told that I could have a case of mild schizophrenia, where my brain forced images I didn't want to see onto the paper. My parents were once again given a prescription for me. My father made a fuss, objecting to having his youngest son take pills for a real medical disorder, rather than having it treated. Safe to say, I didn't go back there again. For months, I had to deal with these jolts, all the damn time, and it got so bad that I stopped sleeping in my room anymore, and just decided to sleep with my brother David. David was 10 at the time, and honestly, he didn't want to have to put up with my shit anymore, but he still let me sleep with him if it got me to shut up. After some time, my birthday came up. The party was supposed to be an excuse for me to get outside time, but with my midnight jolts, my parents decided to let us all stay inside and bond together more. At the party were 3 of my closest friends, 2 of which I was neighbors with, the last one being a classmate. Along with my friends were 2 of my cousins, who were at least 5 years older than my brother, but still enjoyed coming over to hang out with us from time to time. During the party, I somehow managed to forget about the jolts, as everyone played games, talked about upcoming events, and most importantly, laughed at absurdly basic jokes. In the evening, my brother and I grabbed out our sleeping bags. Then David went to set up the pull-out bed from the couch, while I collected blankets and pillows. David stood in front of everyone and told them the sleeping bags were for me, and him only, and that the couch bed would be up for claim. Then I smirked as I told them to duke it out for the bed. I had expected a thumb war or a game of rock, paper, scissors, but instead, our cousins volunteered to sleep on the floor, while my friends arm-wrestled for the couch bed. After deciding the bedding arrangements, we stayed up for a good 2 hours after normal bedtime, daring each other to try staying awake longer than the other. Of course, I was the last to fall asleep. As I drifted off, I smiled from the whole day of fun, despite only really staying inside and laughing until we couldn't breathe. Then, about midnight, I could feel myself being thrown up out of sleep, and the urge to scream and lash out at the closest thing flew by. But my voice, I couldn't scream. My mouth was open, and yet my vocal cords refused to open up. My arms, already in a sleeping bag, didn't move. I remember my cousin saying he had moments like this often. Sleep paralysis, where you wake up too quickly for your body to register it and unlock your movements. I scanned the room to see if anyone was around. The only things I saw was the mess of board games and snacks, my brother, cousins, and friends asleep, and the large window to the side of the front door. My cousin had always told me that in his paralyzed state, he would always try to keep looking at different things, since he knew that the mind would eventually get bored and try to create things like monsters. My brother told him that looking around would encourage the mind to create the demons. My cousin just shrugged and told him that he never saw anything that wasn't there before. I kept looking at every part of the room I could to make sure nothing changed. When I was satisfied, I closed my eyes and tried to go to sleep. Then, shortly after closing my eyes, there was a rustling sound in the bush right outside the large window. My eyes shot open, and I turned to see what it was. I was horrified. The man thing, rather, standing outside my window was tall and dark. He seemed to be wearing a black hoodie of sorts, but his face, I could never forget it. A dark, yet pale face, no discernible mouth or nose, and the eyes. They were exactly like the large dots I saw on the paper in Dr. Cole's office, but they seemed more hollow. Somehow, I managed to scrunch my face up into a scowl, hoping that he would see my anger and leave. He did in fact see the scowl, and turned toward the door, and walked to it. I blinked just to make sure I wasn't seeing things, but the thing, he was now standing inside of my home, just in front of the window. Terrified of blinking, I forced my eyes to stay open. The thing started to walk closer, slowly. My eyes watered, and I fought as hard as I could against the urge to blink, until suddenly, I did. When my eyes opened up, the thing was gone. Scanning the room, nothing was out of the ordinary. I realized that my body was unlocked from paralysis, and I rushed to my brother to wake him up. "David, David," I shouted. "There's a man, I saw him. He's hiding in our house." My brother stirred and turned over from me. "Come on, David. We need to wake up Mom and Dad." "It's late, dude. Go back to sleep." My brother groaned. "No, I can't sleep, David. He's in our home. He could be waiting to kill us." I shouted back. David slowly got up, stretched his arms, and said in a yawn, "How about we look for this man, and if we find him, we can go get Mom and Dad." "Deal." I nodded. David got up, and we began to look around in the living room, under the couch bed, under the coffee table, and we even checked the hallway closet. There was nothing. We went back to bed, and David almost instantly fell asleep. I knew what I saw. I knew it. My jolts after that night stopped. I never knew why. So for a while, I just thought I was going through a fear phase where I was afraid of everything. I'm currently 19 years old, and last night, I was proven wrong when I experienced a jolt, and outside my window was the man with no eyes. I don't know how much time I have. My hands won't stop shaking, and my lungs burn like I breathed in fire. But I need to get this out, because I don't know if I'll make it out of the woods alive before whatever's moving in the tree lane finds me. If you're reading this, you need to understand, everything about Helix Ion Labs wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a conspiracy theory. It was real, and we released something that should have stayed buried forever. I was part of a 5-man response team: Commander Coleman, Matthews, Fields, Torres, and me. We were sent out in response to a containment breach at a classified facility. Comms dead, casualties unknown. The kind of call we train for but pray never comes. The classified facility called Helix Ion Labs wasn't some civilian facility. It was government-funded, buried under 50 feet of reinforced concrete in the middle of nowhere. Genetic research, experimental evolution, stuff that should only exist in movies and fantasy. I'd heard the rumors: gene-spliced animals, human-animal hybrids, soldiers built to survive anything. I thought it was sci-fi nonsense, but I had no clue how wrong I was. We touched down just after dawn. The fog sat low and heavy. swallowing sound before it reached the trees. The steel gate hung open, bent outward, like something had forced its way out. Coleman informed us about the mission before we entered. We are to rescue any survivors, figure out what happened, find the generator room, place charges down, and escape the facility through the tunnel within the generator room that leads out to the woods, Coleman explained. The door is locked with a code which I was given. Once out, the charges should detonate, destroying the facility and everything. When Coleman finished, we headed inside. The power was down. Emergency lights washed the hallways in a suffocating red haze. There was no sound except for the soft hum of our gear and the occasional hiss of steam from broken pipes. The deeper we went, the worse the smell got. Burnt flesh, blood, rot, and something chemical that clawed its way into the back of my throat. We found the first body by reception, or what was left of it. A scientist, half his torso missing. His ribs were snapped outward like a blooming flower, his insides scattered across the floor. Someone had smeared a word across the wall beside him with trembling fingertips. "Run! Animal attack!" Torres whispered. Coleman didn't even glance at him. No animal can do this. We pushed deeper into the facility, sweeping through the East Hall. Bullet casings, scorch marks, and shredded lab coats were everywhere. In one corner, a body was half fused into the wall. Flesh and concrete blended seamlessly, like they'd been made of the same substance. The elevators were twisted wrecks, so we took the maintenance stairs down to Sublevel 3, Genetics Division. Every step we took echoed, and my heart felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. Then we heard it, a scraping sound, metal on concrete. Field swung his light down the corridor, and for a second I saw movement. Something pale, too fast to focus on. "Stay alert," Coleman ordered. "We aren't alone. Watch your six." We found another body. The bones were soft, bent at impossible angles. The skin was melting off like candle wax. Torres gagged. Jesus Christ, what the fuck could do this? Then we heard breathing. It was slow, heavy, and wrong. It stepped into view under a doorway it should have had to crouch beneath. Skin pale and almost luminous, like it wasn't meant for light. Its jaw hung unhinged, teeth black and needle-thin. But its eyes, Christ, those eyes, were locked onto us with a human understanding that froze me in place. Coleman fired first, but it moved faster than anything I've ever seen. It was on Fields before we could even blink. It began tearing into him with claws like bone shards. The sound it made wasn't a roar. It was like laughter, distorted and mechanical. We all opened fire. Bullets tore through it, but it didn't fall. It screamed a high-pitched shriek that made my vision blur. When it slipped back into the vents, Fields wasn't standing with us anymore. All that was left was a pool of shredded flesh, clothes, his gear, and blood. We pushed on because we had to, because stopping meant thinking about what we'd just seen. Once we reached the control room, Coleman found one working video file. Most were corrupted, but one still worked, a video feed from a containment cell. A man was strapped to a table, screaming, his back arcing as something in his skin seemed to shift. Then his skin split open like a cocoon, and something crawled out, something like the thing that killed Fields. The file name burned itself into my mind. Subject 47B, regeneration trial. Torres wanted to abort, but Coleman refused. Sublevel 4 was worse. The air felt humid and alive. The walls pulsed softly, as if breathing with us. Something dropped from the ceiling, thin, pale, faster than the eye could track. Matthews fired instinctively. The muzzle flash lit up others hanging along the walls, clinging like spiders, but shaped like people halfway through becoming something else. They crawled on all fours, bones cracking with each movement. We ran, but they chased after us, screeching. One leaped towards Torres and latched onto his leg. I turned and fired point-blank, blowing half of it off him, but its tendrils were already burrowing into his skin. He screamed in pain until his voice became a gurgle. They began to swarm him, their tendrils writhing under his flesh, hollowing him out, and when they finished, they dragged what was left of him up the wall, using him like an egg sack. We sealed off Sublevel 4 and caught our breath, but Coleman kept us moving. Not for the mission, but for our sanity. For the illusion that we still had control. Matthews's tracker picked up faint readings, multiple signals moving slowly and erratically. Could be survivors, I said, my voice cracking. Doubt it, Matthew replied. No one could have survived this. Coleman sighed. He's right, but we check anyway. Then came the sound, faint at first, then rising, singing, a soft, lilting melody, out of tune but hauntingly familiar, a lullaby, one every child knows, but half a beat off, like someone remembering it wrong. The sound led us to a chamber where the air was hot and wet, reeking of decay, with cables dangled from the ceiling. Only they weren't cables. They swayed and twisted with the rhythm of the song. Something wet splattered on Matthew's shoulder, and when he looked up, he froze mid-breath. The ceiling wasn't metal. It was flesh with living tissue. The cables weren't cables. They were intestines and tongues dangling down with nerves wrapped around them. There were also dozens, maybe hundreds, of human mouths embedded in the surface. Lips cracked and twitching, teeth clicking in perfect harmony. Some mouthed silent words while others sang in fractured tones. Their tongues stretched downward, questing through the air. Jesus Christ, I whispered. Then they began to scream. All of them. The sound inverted, like suction turned inside out. Matthews opened fire and blood, or something like it rained down in sheets, sizzling as it hit the floor. But the mouths didn't stop. They formed words that didn't belong to any language. Suddenly a tongue lashed down, wrapping around Matthews's throat. He clawed at it, eyes bulging. I grabbed his legs and pulled. The tongue tore loose, but so did half his throat. He died immediately in my arms. The mouths began to laugh. Coleman hurled an incendiary grenade, and fire consumed the ceiling, flesh popping like oil. The singing stopped and was replaced by shrieks fading into silence. When the flames died, only two of us remained. We made it to the security wing. The backup power flickered to life. In those brief seconds of light, we saw into the reinforced cells, shapes that might once have been human, or animals, or both. Bodies caught mid-transformation, frozen in poses that felt painfully wrong. That's when I realized, all those rumors about Helix Ion weren't wrong. The abominations in the cells were soldiers, failed prototypes. They were trying to build evolution itself, and they succeeded. We found the generator room and set charges. He ordered me to cover the door. When Coleman placed the last charge, I heard breathing from above. It began to speak with voices that didn't belong together, like switching between radio stations. It dropped down suddenly on Coleman, pinning him down with a loud thud. This one was different this time, bigger, more complete. Like the others we encountered had been prototypes, or between evolving. And this was the final product. Its body was a patchwork of people, stitched together perfectly. I saw pieces, familiar ones, in its shape. Faces I knew, eyes I recognized. Not dead, not alive, they were just present. Its mouth opened vertically, splitting its head in half, revealing rows and rows of needle-sharp teeth. Coleman screamed for me to run, but I hesitated. God help me, I hesitated. That's an order, Martinez. Run. Use the tunnel. Code 8593. Now go. Then it began to tear him apart, ripping through flesh and bones like butter. Coleman didn't scream. He didn't go out without a fight, stabbing it with his knife until his whole body went limp. I fired at the abomination until my rifle clicked empty. After it was finished with Coleman, who was just a pile of torn flesh and blood, it looked towards me and just stared, and then it spoke. It wasn't in words, but the last thing I heard before the blast was the creature mimicking Coleman's voice perfectly, begging me not to leave him. I don't remember entering the code on the keypad, the tunnel, or how I reached the woods. I just knew I wasn't alone when I got there. When the charges blew, the facility collapsed, but the forest moved in ways that didn't match the wind. As I watched from the ridge I found myself on, I saw shapes crawling out of the rubble. There were dozens, maybe even hundreds, making their way into the woods. I've been hiding for 3 hours. My radio is dead and the woods have gone silent. Like everything here is holding its breath. I'm using my phone to get this out. I've already tried calling and texting, but the services went out. The creatures probably took out the towers, cutting off anyone in the area from the rest of the world. Thankfully, the internet is still working, so posting this is my only way to warn everybody. I know releasing this information will cause me to lose my job, but I don't care. I'll do my best to keep everyone updated. If anyone is reading this, don't send help. Don't even investigate. Just spread this post around to warn everyone of what's coming and prepare your homes. Because they're above ground now, and they've evolved into the perfect killing machines. This happened in 2014, just outside Eugene, Oregon, and it's still the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. I was driving home from a late shift, around 11:30 p.m. My route was mostly empty highway, forest on both sides, the kind of road where you might not see another car for minutes at a time. About 10 minutes in, I noticed headlights appear behind me. Nothing unusual, until the SUV stayed glued to my bumper no matter how I changed my speed. At first, I convinced myself I was being dramatic. Maybe he just happened to be going the same way. But then he flashed his high beams. Not once, not twice, over and over. Long flashes, short flashes, almost like a pattern. I took the next exit, hoping he'd continue straight. He didn't. He followed. He stayed right behind me through 2 right turns and a roundabout. Every time I changed direction, his high beams hit my mirrors again. That was the moment my stomach dropped. He wasn't just driving. He was reacting to me. I remembered something my dad always told me. If you're ever being followed, don't go home. Go somewhere public. The nearest thing I knew of was a gas station about 5 minutes away, so I headed toward it. It felt like the longest 5 minutes of my life. The entire time. He stayed close enough that I couldn't even see the front of his hood. When I finally turned into the gas station, he did too. I parked right in front of the door and practically sprinted inside. The clerk looked up and immediately seemed to sense something was wrong. I didn't even have to say anything. He just leaned forward and whispered, "Don't turn around. He's right behind you." I froze. I could hear footsteps coming in, slow and deliberate. The clerk quietly moved his hand to the phone under the counter and said, barely audible, "Stay here." I didn't turn around, but I could see the man reflected in one of the cooler doors. He wasn't buying anything. He wasn't looking at the shelves. He was staring directly at me. Just staring. The clerk called 911 and told me to go into the back room. I stayed there shaking until I heard sirens. When the first police car pulled in, the man bolted out of the store and ran behind the building into the trees. Officers searched the area but didn't find him. Later, one of the detectives told me something that made the whole situation even worse. They'd had multiple reports in the previous month from women who said they'd been followed late at night by a man in an SUV. Same description, same behavior with the headlights. A couple of the women said the guy had tried to get them to pull over. None of them had driven somewhere public. They just sped home, locked their doors, and prayed he didn't get out. The detective told me bluntly, "You probably avoided something very bad by stopping where other people could see you." I think about that night every time I drive alone. I still get tense when I see headlights in my mirror for too long, and I still hear the clerk's voice in my head. "Don't turn around. He's right behind you." I am a solo hiker in the Western Cascades, and frequently go out to the forests near my town. The specific region of woods that I frequent is a nameless stretch of immensely dense temperate rainforest, which has almost never been disturbed by human activity beyond the felling of a few specific trees for lumber over 100 years ago, of which the massive stumps remain. It is virtually impossible to explore the entirety of even a 50-square-meter stretch of woods like this, as there's just so much stuff. Each hike you will inevitably find some novel and interesting tapestry of nature. Combine this with the fact that the full scale of the Cascadian forest stretches across hundreds of kilometers. The woods around my town have always had an air of awe and mystery to them, as well as an air of uncanniness at the sheer scale of wilderness and what could be hiding within. In addition, while it may not seem relevant now in my story, my town and the surrounding woods lie directly on top of a set of ancient fault lines stretching God knows how deep into the hundreds of millions of years old rock. This will come into play later, as I believe these fractures to be the source of my encounters. The following is transcribed from my hiking journal throughout late July of 2021 and is mostly left faithful to how it was originally written. July 23rd, wonderful woods, bobcat tracks, and mystery growths. The day was pleasant, the temperature not being too oppressive for a clear summer sky. I had decided to deviate from my normal path into the forest, going eastward into the deeper, wetter woods, where the only semblance of human activity were the planes flying overhead. My plan was to stay out in the woods for at most 2 nights. This was the day I set out, armed with a pop-up tent, enough food and water to supply me for several days, as well as a pack of various survival tools/gear. For the majority of the day, nothing particularly unusual happened. It was just me, my bags, and my compass traveling eastwards through some of the most beautiful nature you could ever see. I saw a multitude of common critters, such as squirrels, deer, and even some old bobcat tracks in the mud. However, sometime near sunset's approach, I found something rather strange. I had picked up a rather pretty granite rock to get a closer look at the crystal structure, when I noticed a series of dull crimson-colored polyp-like growths on the underside of the rock, where it had been embedded in the moss. These growths were small, only about a centimeter long at most, and with a rubbery-looking texture. I had never seen anything quite like this, but it did not strike me as unexplainable. There are countless plant, insect, and fungus species in these woods, and just because I have never seen something does not mean that it is an abnormality. Still worth documenting, though, even if it probably is just the cocoons of some odd insect or something of the sort. July 23rd night. Strange noises and more growths. Tonight, things have been strange, and I am starting to feel uneasy about this trip. I had set up camp in a little depression underneath a fallen cedar tree, likely blown down during the winter windstorms. While clearing sticks and rocks out of the way so I could set my tent up, I found several more of those growths. They were similar in shape and color, though now were appearing in clusters of 2 to 10 or so. In addition, these ones seemed larger, with some surpassing 2 centimeters. The sudden increase in density and size compared to where I had seen them earlier gave me an uneasy feeling, though I found it easy enough to brush that feeling aside and just set my tent up pushed to the side as to avoid squishing a few particularly large clusters. The evening was fairly uneventful, and sleep came for me fast. However, at some point I awoke in the dead of night. It was impossible to tell the time, given that a thick fog had rolled in and obscured the night sky. The first alarm that something was not off was the silence of the forest. Usually, even at night, some critter would be yapping its head off. However, now, it was just perfect silence. Silence like that usually means some sort of predator is nearby, possibly a bear or even a cougar. My suspicions that I was not alone were confirmed when I heard a call of some sort emanate from deeper down in the valley. The call was shrill, sounding almost like a squeak or a chirp with a slight warble. This sound would be repeated 3 or 4 times before stopping for a minute and then starting back up again. Hearing the chirping, my brain immediately went cougar, and I froze. Even though the sounds appeared distant, I still felt more scared for my life than I had since the home invasion a few years back. Eventually, though, the sound stopped, and after what felt like an hour at least, sleep came for me again. July 24th, downhill. Downhill fast. Today was when shit really hit the fan. When morning came, I was determined to leave the area as soon as possible, as I did not want to be in the hunting grounds of what I had assumed to be a big cat. Oh, how wrong I was in that assumption. Pretty much as soon as I woke up, I was packing my things up and heading out of the valley. I believed I was going south, closer to civilization. However, I later found out that my compass had failed me. The little bearing on which the needle that rotates had gotten stuck, and in my hurry, I did not bother to check if it was actually rotating. I assumed that since I had pulled it out and it was facing directly ahead, that if I started walking in the opposite direction, I would be going south. Only after an hour of nervous walking did I think to pull it out again and check. After realizing my terrible mistake, I sat down and began to hit the compass against my knee in an attempt to get the troublesome needle to unstick itself. After 3 good hits, the compass was spinning again, and that's when I noticed them. The growths. They were everywhere in the underbrush, some as massive as my hand. In addition, there were several other distinct features. There were stringy red vines, only a millimeter thick, snaking across the ground and up around the bases of the scraggly brush, filling the hillside. There were spiny scarlet shoots the size of my finger, jetting out from the moss on the logs. There were flat, dried blood-colored disc-shaped masses the size of quarters, growing on the undersides of some leaves. It was at this point I knew, without a doubt, that this was very much not natural. I stood up and just gazed out at the woods. Now, without the adrenaline of trying to speed walk through waist-high ferns, I saw things clearly. Red specks on everything in the woods, staring back at me like a million alien eyes. I was trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a disease? Was it a rare native plant? Was it honest-to-God alien life? No explanations made sense in my head. While standing there, I heard the noise from last night again, just as distant sounding. Instinctively, I turned around to look behind me in the direction of where the noise had come from, and I saw it. I saw the thing that had been stalking me for hours. It looked nothing like any earthly creature, being instead a bizarre mass of sunburned flesh and indiscernible features. It was tall, around 2 meters so. Its body was roughly cylindrical, seeming almost bulbous. It had no arms, but instead had a pit in the center of its torso, which appeared to be full of small tendrils. In this pit, it held a small stick, the tendrils wrapped around it tightly. The creature had 3 legs, the length of which constituted the majority of its height. Each leg had 4, maybe 5 joints, being something of a gray area between leg and tentacle. The creature's head was roughly triangular in shape, being directly attached to the torso without any semblance of a neck. It had a series of dark spots which might have been eyes arranged in a ring around the upper part of its head. I saw no discernible ears, mouth, or any other human feature. This was an unknown. Closest thing I could compare it to would be some sort of deep-sea abomination. I have no idea how long me and that thing stared at each other for, but eventually it made that same awful noise. The noise sounded the same as the previous 2 times, though now it was very apparent that it was not distant. That thing had been just a few meters from my tent last night. As soon as I heard the noise, I booked it. I ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction, not minding that my pants were getting torn to shreds. I ran like my life depended on it, as I believe it very well did in the moment. The fact that the crimson vegetation was becoming more and more frequent and apparent was the least of my concerns. July 25th read hell. I fell hard. I rolled down a steep hillside and into a rushing stream. My memories of this part are hazy. All I know is that I was knocked around into logs and rocks by the water until I eventually lost consciousness by fault of a boulder in the middle of the stream. When I came to, I was pretty beaten up. At least I was alive, though. The sun was rising, indicating that I had been unconscious on the river shore for the entirety of the night. Unconscious, with that creature roaming about. I was still somewhat delirious from the hit to my head, and it took a few minutes to register where I was. I looked around, and my heart sunk. There was no green anywhere, just shades of red. The alien landscape I was looking out at was not large, as I could see green, still living trees a ways away. The trees within the zone of complete biosphere replacement had all died off, seeming to have been dead for a long time, given the lack of remaining small branches. In place of everything earthly was a jungle of numerous distinct and seemingly thriving organisms. Everything had a somewhat fleshy appearance to it. There were the polyp-like growths I saw first, just scaled up dramatically, and now with rows of pores visible across their surfaces. There were scarlet vines which stretched out across the forest floor like a network of sickly arteries and veins. There were web-like masses stretched between the trunks of dead trees, from which bulbous sacs hung, dripping some sort of dark gray fluid onto the ground below. There was a pervasive red moss, which clung to every surface it could. There were massive ridged discs jutting out at haphazard angles from the bases of the dead trees. There were tall, spindly shoots reaching twice my height topped with barbed flower-shaped orifices, of which one almost seemed to begin to lean towards me. It was a mesmerizing, terrifying, and strangely beautiful sight, like a mix between gazing into the Amazon rainforest and gazing into the inner workings of a body. Seeing the subtle movements of the stork I could only assume was carnivorous, I began to run again. My only way forwards was through, and I paid little attention to the carnal tropics around me as I ran. I never passed through the direct center, though I saw a large slab of stone with what seemed to be a fissure running down it. I assumed this to be the middle, and while running I'm pretty sure I saw a creature similar to the one that was stalking me approach the fissure, deflate its body somehow, and slide in. Eventually, I reached the green once more. Now was time for me to get home. The day was still new, and I knew that if I went directly north, I would inevitably find a Forest Service road that I could follow to civilization, as the logging woods were to the north. The rest of the day was blissfully uneventful, albeit sore and pained. I will likely keep out of my journal now, unless something else worth writing down happens, as I would currently rather focus on getting home. End of journal. Eventually I did get home, after 2 days of wandering down an abysmally curvy Forest Service road that looked like it hadn't been driven on in years. Eventually, I reached a main road and was able to pick up a ride. The driver asked me lots of questions, which was expected given my bloody, battered state. I simply just told him I had gotten lost and taken a fall, which was as much truth as he needed to know. I believe I had encountered some sort of deep-crust biosphere seeping up into the surface world. The rocks here are hundreds of millions of years old and riddled with fault lines and rifts. Far too tight of a squeeze for humans, but not for whatever life has been evolving and festering down there, kilometers below the surface for eons. Now, before I go, I want to share one last piece of information. There are 2 common plants here, English ivy and Himalayan blackberry. Both of these plants are invasive species, brought over from a completely different region. In their home region, they stay under control as they are part of the local ecosystem. However, upon being brought over to the West Coast, these plants went out of control due to a lack of predation. Now, ivy strangles trees and forms impenetrable walls of vines, while blackberries cover entire hillsides and fields and brambles. I fear that life forms which have evolved specifically to thrive in the most extreme regions possible, being compressed and heated constantly, will absolutely plunder the energy-rich and water-saturated surface world. I fear that one of these days, I will find deep red-hued growths hiding in my lawn. I fear that one of these days, I will see the red jungles grow where all the green forests once stood. I am an 18-years-old female. Last week I was exorcised against my will by my mother, stepfather, and an exorcist priest. After she married my stepfather, many years ago, my mother was sucked into his religious obsession. She developed a manic distrust of the world, seeing demonic influences around every corner. I was pulled out of school, kept at home almost constantly, and subjected to a grueling prayer regime. I only had one friend growing up, a girl from the neighborhood who would sneak into the garden to play with me when the grown-ups weren't looking. I believe that my turning 18 triggered my mother's paranoia. Even though she and my stepfather raised me to be entirely dependent on them, they knew that if I decided to, I was now able to leave. They began to look at me with fear in their eyes. Whenever I walked into a room, they would fall silent mid-conversation and hold their breath until I was gone. During prayer, the words came out as whispers from their mouth, as if they were uttering something obscene. One night, I woke up to go to the restroom and found my bedroom door locked. I exploded. This was too much. I started screaming and kicking the door with all my might, only to discover that they had installed a bolt while I was sleeping. I wet myself that night. After that incident, they decided that I was becoming too dangerous and had the exorcist priest come to the house. They tied me to the bed, arms and legs spread apart. The rope cut through my skin. I begged them to untie it, or at least loosen it a bit. The exorcist warned them that the demon inside me was going to cry and plead they shouldn't listen to anything I say. The exorcist placed himself at the end of the bed, Bible in hand, with my mother and stepfather at both sides. How hideous they looked. twisted with fear and cruelty. And the worst of them all was the priest. He started reading from a Bible, or rather, yelling the Bible at me with such force that I burst into tears. The man threw his arms in the air excitedly. "You see, the Bible makes her cry. She is possessed." In a panic, I pulled on the ropes, tried to set myself free. My mother screamed as if I was a corpse rising from the grave, while my stepfather and the priest pushed me down violently. Eventually, I figured out that the only way out of that torture chamber was through their delusion. I started speaking in two voices, my normal voice and a raspy voice that was meant to represent the demons. I staged a conversation between the demon saying he would never leave me, and me ordering him to go away. Go away. Go away. Finally, I simmered down and began to recite prayer upon prayer in my normal voice, until my tormentors were convinced that I had been saved. The next day, I picked up my courage and went to the police. They took me more seriously than I thought they would. I must have been visibly distressed, not to mention wounds on my ankles and wrists. They placed me in a women's shelter, pending an investigation into my family. I was proud of myself for taking action, although the more time passed, the more I have been wondering if it will make any difference. When I was younger, someone reported my parents to social services. Social workers came snooping around the house. There was some commotion for a brief period of time. Then they backed off, and nothing changed. Life at the shelter has been more peaceful than at home, but lonely as well. I missed my girlfriend, the only person who ever brightened my days in that godforsaken house. This afternoon, she surprised me with a visit. As I told her what I had been through, she held my hand and offered me a kind smile, her black eyes contemplating me as if I was the only person in the world. When the time came for her to leave, I hugged her tightly. She licked my ear with her forked tongue and whispered, "I'll pick you up at midnight. We're going to skin them alive." It happened whilst I was sailing in the bay. The last thing I saw was the wooden boom of my boat wheeling towards me, and then stars and galaxies rushed by, all adhering to some dizzying curvature, before I finally woke in my apartment. I remember that I screamed, not only from the horror of being set overboard on choppy waters, and not even from the horror of beholding a cosmic nightmare I didn't understand. No, I screamed because my apartment wasn't my apartment at all. I knew as much in my gut. When I looked down at my English Springer Spaniel Bonnie, I felt much the same. She wasn't Bonnie at all. She was exact, in terms of appearance and temperament, but entirely inexact. Her glinting brown eyes unnerved me to the extent that I quickly looked away. Perfect. That was the problem. Everything was perfect. As I staggered to the hallway, I wondered whether the bad dream was my boating accident or this. It was then that I cast my eyes to the curtains drawn across my living room windows, but before I opened them, there came knocking. I remember answering the front door to find a pristine white hallway, which wasn't the hallway I knew, and standing in that hallway was a man of average build, average height, and average face, perhaps brown hair and eyes. My memory of him is shrouded in fog, as is much of our conversation. The exact words. The exact meaning of his exact words. "Hello, Finnegan. I'm your guide." "Guide," I repeated. I think he nodded. There is no gentle way to do this. The guide raised his hand, and with that came dazzling white light from the apartment behind me, dazzling enough to bounce off the corridor walls and temporarily blind me. I shielded my face for a moment, but the guide gently took my arm and lowered it. Then he twisted me around to face my living room windows, and we started to walk towards them. My jaw dropped. Outside was not my neighborhood, but a community hemmed in by 40 feet tall walls of large reddish stone blocks, embedded with various jewels. At intervals were gates bearing bars of pearl and topped with pointed railheads, themselves topped with strange rippling shapes, too distant to discern, but clearly blemishes on an otherwise opulent exterior. Blemishes to my eyes, at least. They disconcerted me. Their movements. They sat, or wriggled, at odds with the splendor of this place. Within the community itself, which spanned perhaps a square mile, the roads were built of gold that appeared more liquid than solid. It shimmered beneath there ought to have been a sun, but light emanated from no clear source, and overhead hung white clouds more than blue sky, assuring me that there was nothing earthly about this place. Lining the roads were hundreds of four-storied buildings with brutalist white brickwork. Through the windows were ordinary homes and not-so-ordinary homes. My stomach lurched as I looked upon such oddities, behind those glass panes, as luscious woodlands and black voids, and even things other than people. A tremendously tall and broad-shouldered humanoid, body laden with scales, stood and waved at me. He had the most horrible smile, a smile not egregious as such, but hollow. I let out a little grunt of fear and nearly lost my balance, but the guide caught me. "You are dead, Finnegan," he confirmed. I say confirmed because I'd already known that, of course, but hearing it was quite something else. "What is this place?" I asked. "The place at which all souls eventually rest, no matter the world on which they are born, and no matter the religion," the guide said, nodding at the scaly creature which had terrified me. "Every soul is granted a personal paradise. You are standing within yours. Is this heaven? If you like. But I'm an atheist." "No matter the religion," he repeated. "This is a place for the righteous, not the pious. Faith doesn't matter in the end. All religions speak fragments of the truth, gleaned from tales spun by those who glimpsed heaven before returning to the land of the living. You will join them in time, Finnegan. Your body persists in a between state back on Earth. And you're my guide here." "That's right." I pointed beyond the stone walls and the pearly gates. "Then tell me, what's that place?" Beyond our gated paradise, the sky was filled with neither white clouds nor patches of blue. There was no light in that place, only dark, but it was no void. I sensed something within the black, and it made my stomach twist just to look upon it. There are many names a human might use for that place. Hell, perhaps. "Hell," I repeated fearfully. The guide narrowed his eyes at me, and there was something horrid within them, something impossibly deep, and perhaps darker even than the land of hell beyond the pearly gates. I blinked my eyes in dread and jumped out of my skin to find us standing outside, standing on that liquid gold road, which felt warm and soft beneath my feet. I looked up at the apartment block, searching for the reptilian creature I'd seen. I thought of its smile. I thought of Bonnie's eyes. Perfection. Well, perfection didn't sit properly. It was almost a relief when I screeched in horror, having seen something worthy of a frightened reaction, something that challenged this false utopia. I could clearly see those strange rippling shapes atop the gates, one skewered on each spiked railhead, skeletal bodies, still alive, left to squirm as those gates pierced their bodies for all eternity. But this wasn't the only reason I screeched. From the black of hell, through the bars of the pearly gates, arms wormed with outstretched hands, grasping at our little slice of heaven, appearing to me like the undead from an old film. I suppose we were the undead. I saw glimpses of flesh and monstrous, spider-like limbs. Demons of the underworld. A woman's scream cut off my thoughts. It came from within heaven, a little way down the golden street. The guide and I turned to face a human lady barreling towards us. "You need to kill me. Kill me. Make this eternity end. Make—" The guide extended both his arms and brought the woman to a halt, with palms against her eyes. Just like that, her screams became muted and unintelligible groans. She stood and writhed on the spot, metaphysical form glued still by the guide. "I see you found your way over the wall and into paradise, Helen. But there will be no sadness here, no anger, no boredom, only peace and order." The guide began to pull his hands away from Helen's face, and I screamed as translucent strands of white gunk peeled out of her sockets, a sight more grotesque than any mortal torture, for I knew the guide had removed something far more important than her physical innards. He had stolen a part of Helen herself. When the white gunk was severed fully from her metaphysical body, or soul, she was left a spiritually lobotomized husk. And I think blissful ignorance would have been a gift, but this was not that, because I remember Helen smiling at the guide with tears in her eyes. Part of her zombified and fragmented soul understood what had happened to her. "Happy," she whispered. Yes, the guide said. Happy. Helen, screamed a man from the gates. Oh, Helen. Helen, no. Let her die. Let us all die, you monster. I tried to cling to ignorance, but it was no use. I thought of a smiling reptilian and realized those weren't demons at the gates, standing alongside the humans. They were tortured souls from other worlds. And then I screamed as I saw the guide looking upon me, eyes no longer deep, but infinite, an infinite black, stretching towards me like his inescapable arms. There was no outrunning or overpowering him. As his fleshy palms met my eyes, I felt a spiritual agony beyond having one's physical eyes torn from their sockets. But I understood only a fragment of Helen's pain, for the guide stopped after a mere moment, plucked only the slightest of strands from my eyes, enough to strip my agency. I smiled outwardly, but endured terror inwardly. That's better. But I mustn't take too much, he said. You still have to go back down there. Still have to function. Losing but a sliver of my sanity left me cold and horrified, as I pictured what Helen and the other husks of that gated community must be enduring. What so many souls in that gated community of heaven had already endured for years, centuries, or millennia. This wasn't paradise. It was an illusion. I saw it all when the guide touched my eyes. Knowledge was a gift from him, or perhaps a side effect of our momentary connection. The Creator made a mistake when creating the universe, creating life on his many worlds. He misunderstood that life is beautiful because it is finite, because it ends, because it is imperfect. There is heavenliness to be found amidst the suffering. Up in heaven, however, there was no strife, no end, and no substance beneath the cookie-cutter sheen. It was then, with a tightening chest, that I understood it wasn't hell beyond the gates. It was old heaven. It had been abandoned when the people revolted, demanding an end to infinite perfection. That false and mind-numbing nightmare, only made worse when the guides tried to fix people by turning their complicated, anxious, and unhappy souls into hollowed-out ones, coming as close to killing their essences as possible, but serving them a worse fate of eternal torture as a mutated half-thing. The alternative, of course, was existing in the infinite dark and nothingness of what the last guide called hell. How did the Creator make a mistake? I wondered. Isn't he almighty? The guide read my mind. Is a mother almighty because she creates life? The Creator is powerful and present and knowledgeable, but he is not omnipotent, omnipresent, or omniscient. You and countless other souls have a fiction in your mind of deities and angels. We are immortal, but not almighty. The rebels overpowered all but me. I winced and finally found the strength to speak. How? I retreated, unlike those undying fools up there, he said, nodding at the writhing guides atop the gate railheads. Those undying but broken fools. Yes, I could take them down, but why? They are little use to me now. Their minds are shattered. They need fixing as much as the billions of souls in the great dark. If I had the strength to do so, I would. You know, Helen is not the first to scale these walls. She is lucky to have received my mercy. But should she ask too much of me, she will go back out into the dark with them. He pointed towards old heaven. See this as a lesson for when you come back here, Finnegan, and thank me. Thank your merciful guide. Those black eyes bore holes through my very soul. The guide reached out a hand for me, and I found myself unwillingly leaning forwards to kiss it. The touch of it against my lips was akin to, well, nothing earthly. It was, perhaps, the primal terror one feels when facing one's end, only that end was unending in this case. Whatever the feeling, which I still struggle to put into words, I managed only to shriek inwardly, once again, for I smiled outwardly. Thank you, I said, words put in my mouth by this monstrous thing. Bless you, child, he said. I will see you again, and you will enjoy your forever paradise, or you will face the forever dark. I was waking. I could feel it. I was fading back into reality, and that brought me no relief, because I knew one day I would die again and return to this afterlife. I was horrified of that prospect, of choosing either the infinite black void of clamoring souls, begging for release, or becoming a zombified plaything for this megalomaniacal guide, who was determined only to create a peaceful and ordered paradise, not to actually ensure the well-being of his souls. And I started to become aware of something. Perhaps I'd known it from the moment he knocked on my door. But as white enveloped me, I asked the one question to which I already knew the answer. "You're not really one of the guides, are you?" was the thought circling my mind. "Who are you?" He did not respond. I woke in a hospital bed, surrounded by family, and the doctors told me I'd been in a coma for 3 months. The whole ordeal had felt like 3 minutes to me. I don't know what I saw, but I am now terrified of dying. Terrified of that infinite darkness, whether I end up experiencing forever nothingness or forever insanity. Both are forms of torture. Heaven has become hell,